The other thing going on yesterday, Azeez Al-Shaair with the 3-game suspension handed down by the NFL. A lot of discourse on the social media channels about this.
Just thinking this is a terrible show to be. There's a lot of nuanced conversations to take place and not a lot of time to take them in.
I'm okay. I'm okay diving into this a little bit if you want.
I mean, I think 3 games is about right. You and I both would have leaned on more.
Three's a heavy number relative to others.
So that's what I'm saying.
Kareem Jackson get after his multiple offenses?
I think. But it's right. I think so. I think you're right. Because I would have leaned on suspending him for longer. Most other people would have leaned on suspending him for less and complained about precedent. So I think actually 3 probably ends up in the right spot. I think there's just a lot of it's sprouted. It's taken on a life of its own and sprouted all these different arms and tentacles of discussion. I think ultimately it was a really bad, egregious hit. The debate as to was it malicious or not. Nobody knows except Al-Shaair, ultimately. It was the first hit in a long time where I think the default view of it said that's dirty as opposed to just clumsy. So that is something. I think the reason it caused such a shitstorm in the first place is because it was so bad. We're not having this discussion with every hit. We're having it with this one because immediately, as soon as it happened, even before you saw Trevor Lawrence has got the fencing response, he's been KO'd by it. The second it happened, everybody was like, whoa, that's way over the top.
I mean, even if he popped, it wasn't the reaction it wasn't the fact that Lawrence got hurt that made it look bad.
That's
it was literally the hit, yeah.
It was immediate. Like that hit in itself caused the problem. So somebody was saying, was it Caserio talking about the overreaction from the Jacksonville bench? I think it was an appropriate reaction, to be honest. Maybe it's not one you want as the NFL, but that's the kind of hit that should spark an immediate brawl from the other side going, you just leveled our quarterback, even again before they found out that he was KO'd on the play.
Right.
Just the hit, I think it was an appropriate reaction so that hit was so bad, I think it sparked the brawl. Like that's just part and parcel of the hit, which is why, again, I think 3 games is fair. I do think that people went crazy with assigning, not necessarily assigning intent, but apparently his cleats were like Free Palestine or something. So immediately it becomes political. He's being called all kinds of things. It's like it did get personal in a way that it shouldn't have. And Caserio made that point in his press conference. I think that's entirely fair to say, look, you guys don't know him. You're not around him. He's a fantastic human being. This doesn't represent who he is, even if there are other incidents in his past. I think that's a fair point. You shouldn't make that personal. It's enough to say that's a terrible hit and he should be suspended.
Was the personal stuff related to that or the way the letter came down from the NFL? Because then
no,
there's also discourse in
the
guy handing down the letters, John Runyon, who was one of the dirtiest players. And I know
history.
there's a whole there's a whole discussion around that where I think I might disagree with most people. But.
Yeah, there was, first of all, there was Al-Shaair's apology, which then at the end of his apology sort of trashed a bunch of fans that were calling him names, right, and calling him Islamophobic or whatever. There's a bunch of for being Islamophobic. There was that added fuel to the fire. Then there was John Runyon's statement, which started moralizing about the hit after the career that John Runyon had. I'm sure that didn't help either. Just every avenue that this has sprouted, I don't think has been particularly helpful, including the debate as to whether quarterback sliding in and of itself is something that needs to be taken out of the game, which I think is a debate that can be had and is worth having. I just don't think it's helpful in this context because this was not one of those plays where a quarterback baited him with a late slide. The quarterback is literally sliding 5 yards away from the hit. He had plenty of time to pull out of that hit and not deliver it, and instead decided to do it anyway. So this is not the hit to use to talk about should quarterback sliding be eliminated as a thing, right? We can have that conversation.
I'm open to that discussion.
Yeah.
I agree. This is not the hit for that.
I mean, I was talking to Ryan Fitzpatrick a little bit in DMs, and Fitzpatrick is not a quarterback that slid. He just didn't do that as part of his shtick. I think there's definitely there's definitely valid notions to the concept that sliding, whether or not you're doing it too close to the thing. Simply, when you slide, you are putting all of your momentum going backwards anyway.
You're going to smack your head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you get any kind of hit from head on, your head is being turbocharged into the turf in a way that doesn't happen if you're just running forwards and brace yourself for impact and just hit the turf, right? I think actually an unintended consequence of this sort of get out clause to quarterbacks to try and protect them is actually putting them in harm's way sometimes in a way that it shouldn't. Now, again, this is not the hit to prove that, because he gave him so much time to pull out of it, it shouldn't have ever happened.
I'm okay with all of that discourse because I brought that up a bunch. There was I forgot about this clip that people started using my clip from Twitter from week 1 last year, Mahomes against the Lions, where Mahomes did like a little body lean,
right?
And some dude just ran right by him. It's like, oh, I'm going to slide, and I'm not. Listen, I think Mahomes is as guilty as anyone as exploiting those rules. I think a lot of quarterbacks have exploited the late slide and the I'm going to get every last inch before I go out of bounds and almost inducing the late hit.
Yeah.
And so this goes back to that idea of late hits over the middle by a safety. Is the quarterback to blame for some of those? I've been on that side. The whole Brady discourse about that. And that doesn't mean like a quarterback's not going to have an inaccurate throw over the middle or just be late. Like, of course they're going to make mistakes and like hang the receiver out to dry. But the discourse around like the rules are in place to protect the quarterback. You can't have quarterbacks exploiting the rules. So there's a discussion to be had around that. I agree. This is not the place. This is not the hit to have that one. But I would like to have that discussion.
Yeah. I also think
I hate that because like if the rule's in place to protect you, and by the way, we hear a lot of like guys don't want to get hit in the knees and the head and all that stuff. Players right now don't want to get hurt at all. They don't want to miss time. That's their job. That's their livelihood. The reason why the NFL's cracked down on head injuries is for 20, 30, 40 years from now, that's where you see this impact on players that played in the 70s, 80s, and 90s dealing with head issues, brain issues later in life. The brain is more important than the knees, right? So it's not about just keeping them healthy. It's about this long-term effect. And if they're putting all these rules in place to keep you healthy for life, theoretically, right? There's money attached to all this stuff too. It's not just because the NFL is just trying to be good people. It's always money too. But if that's what they're trying to do, then the QBs can't exploit it just to grab a couple extra yards.
Yeah, see, I don't know. It's a complicated discussion. At some point, I want to have an NFL defender on this show and kind of talk this out long form.
Sherm's not interested.
One of them wasn't tremendously keen on it. I had a little DM conversation with Richard Sherman as well, who'd been a friend of the show way back when, and guy we talked to before. A lot of defenders, you hear this anytime there's a rule change or anytime there's like the hip drop tackle, right? How are we supposed to play defense anymore, right? What are we doing here? We can't hit here, can't hit there. What am I supposed to do, right? So I think there's a reality that, look, if we are accepting collectively that we want to change the game and make it safer for all involved, which somebody else has already made that call, right? That's above my pay grade. I'm not Raj. I'm not Goodell making that decision. There has been a determination that the game needs to change. I would be fine with leaving it as it was in the 1980s and saying it's a violent game. You're going to get your brain scrambled. You're getting paid a lot of money to do that. If you want to sign up, go for it. If you don't, go play something else, right? I'm okay with that as a trade-off. The same way, you're going to get kicked in the head if you're an MMA fighter, right? It's part of the game. It's a risk. If you think you can avoid that risk, go for it. If you want to sign up, here's your money. I'm okay with that as a concept, but the NFL has determined it isn't, and it's going in a different direction. It's making it safer, as is rugby, as is soccer, as is pretty much any other game you can think of. They are trying to make it safer, even if it's only motivated because they don't want to get sued and have a class action suit for $1 billion, right? If that's the case, then unfortunately you have to accept that the burden of that is going to fall on defensive players because they're the ones delivering the hits most of the time, right? So you can't simply say it's being made too difficult for defenders because, yeah, it is, but that's how you change behavior, right? One of the reasons the Al-Shaair thing caused such a furore is because that hit is very unusual now. It didn't used to be. That hit used to take place quite a lot, and then players have adapted. Players don't make that hit anymore. They pull up, they avoid it. It has successfully changed behavior, right? There are other hits that you see every week, whether it's safeties decapitating wide receivers down the sideline, whether it's hits to the quarterback that don't happen anymore. the NFL has already successfully changed behavior. So every time you hear one of these guys say, I don't know how you're supposed to play defense anymore, it's getting harder, but you can still do it. You just have to, at some stage, decide, I'm not going to make this hit. I can't anymore. Or if I do and I get it wrong, I get a penalty, I get a suspension. It is now part of the game. Again, this happens in all sports. I think that's a difficult thing to juggle with. And it's, again, why I hate the fining system so much. And I hadn't even thought about this until yesterday, but the fining system disproportionately targets defensive players because we're trying to change behavior, and those guys deliver hits that offensive players never do. So they're getting fined for hits that offensive players never have to even reckon with. It's unfair in that regard as well. But this is all part of this broader conversation. If we're changing the game for safety, you're going to have to adapt your behavior.
But why is it 100% on them, though? That's the point.
It's not 100%.
Because that's where Sherm, that's where all the defenders are coming. Like, they're like, every rule change is going against us.
Yeah, because they're the ones that hit.
But offensive players, his point was,
it's not every rule
slide
change.
Earlier, run out of bounds early. Don't exploit the rules that are in your favor.
But okay, here's the thing. It's not every change. It's most of, ultimately in a game of blocking and tackling, most of the violence takes place from the guys trying to deliver a hit versus the guys that are not, right? So that's a reality. Most of the things that change are going to be defensive, but it's not all of them. You can't crack back as a wide receiver anymore and decleat a defender who never sees you coming. That, as somebody from personal experience, that is the most fun play you can have as a wide receiver. That's more fun than scoring a touchdown. That's more fun than making a spectacular one-handed catch, burying a dude that never saw you coming.
I think
on
it's
a
the most overrated
block.
Play, too.
Sure, but it's incredibly fun and it's incredibly devastating, and it's no longer allowed to be done, right? It's not all on defensive players. We are taking out everything that's egregious and leads to injuries and doesn't need to happen, right? It's just that most of those are defensive. But the other thing I would push back on is I think just because you are being baited into a penalty does not absolve you from the penalty, right? In soccer, most of the bad fouls are mistimed tackles where if the guy doesn't bait you with quick footwork, it's not a foul. But he did.
But it becomes awful football. Like when you think the quarterback is going to slide and you pull up and he just runs right by you. Or you think he's still in the field of play. Like you can still hit him in the field of play. If he's going to push the boundary of the rules, you should be able to hit him. And so when then they get into this, he's just out of bounds, his foot's basically in, and we had this debate last year, Mahomes against the Packers. He was still in bounds because he wanted to get every last inch, and he took a big hit. But the rule's in place to protect Mahomes.
Right.
And he's like, no, I would rather take the big hit because the yard matters more to me.
Where do you stop this? So the problem is, they're like, he could have slid earlier, right? In this specific, the people are arguing this for that Lawrence hit, right?
This was a bad defensive play where I don't think has anything to do with the offense.
But it does, because
I see people in the chat saying slide earlier. He slid at a normal.
That's what I'm saying.
Other times people have done it super late.
This is my problem with this, right? In other sports, it's a zero tolerance thing. The responsibility is on the defensive player not to commit the foul, even if the offensive player does something to essentially induce it, right? Now, there's mitigation. You can say, okay, that was a penalty. Rugby does this. That was a penalty, but the ball carrier dropped his height at the last second, or he changed, whatever, and we mitigate that down. It's no longer a red card, it's a yellow card, right? You can reduce the severity of the punishment, but ultimately the foul play occurred because the defender hit the guy in the head, right? If the quarterback is going to induce the foul, it's still a foul. We can maybe mitigate the punishment for it, but my problem with it is people are using that hit as an argument, and they're saying, well, he could have slid earlier. Okay, he could have, right? Where do you want him to slide? How far is too far, right? If he slid with 5 yards before the hit, right, which you and I think is a perfectly reasonable amount of space to be sliding, right? If he'd gone to 1, from your comments so far, you certainly would have said that's too far. He went too close to the linebacker. It's his fault. It's Lawrence's fault for not sliding earlier. He should have slid at the 5, right? Well, he slid at the 5 and he got buried, and so that's a penalty. People are saying he could have slid even earlier. Sure. If he'd slid at the 10 yards ahead of the guy, is that reasonable? What if he slid 10 yards in front of him and Al-Shaair still thought, screw it, I'm going to take his head off? Is it still Lawrence's fault? This is the problem with this. You have to put the burden of responsibility falls on the guy delivering the hit.
You know it when you see it. Look, I'll take it one step further. If we truly care about the player safety thing, you would have more in the grasp calls on sacks. You'd lose some spectacular plays. How many times have we seen Lamar, Mahomes, Allen, whoever, get tackled in the backfield, about to be tackled? Defenders are afraid. They fall off of them, but you kind of like let them play. Like, just don't even let them play it out. Don't even let them play it out.
I think there's a very reasonable
just
argument.
blow the whistle if you're truly trying to protect everybody.
But the other problem is that it's a rule essentially designed for Tua, right? Or like a frail quarterback that you want to not be exposed to hits by linebackers, right? The problem is the same position has these frail quarterbacks that don't want to take a hit versus Josh Allen, right? It's like, how do you give the same guy protections when, and Trevor Lawrence, this is a conversation people have had as well. On Lawrence's tape, friend of the show, Alex Anzalone was making this point on Ross Tucker's podcast. You watch Tom Brady's tape, every time he gets anywhere near a defensive player, slide, hit the ground, right? They know he's going to do that. Trevor Lawrence's tape has got plenty of plays where he decides he's going to lower his shoulder and truck somebody. So this guy's now making that debate on the fly. Is he sliding? Is he going to try and run me over? He's 6'6", and he's a heavy guy. That's the problem, right? You've got Josh Allen in the open field. How do you have the same protections?
He's going to jump over you. He's going to run over you. Sometimes he's going to slide. You don't know.
How do you give him the same protections when he's actually more likely to try and truck you than he is to give himself up and slide in front of you? To me, I would say, I think there's a very reasonable argument to say, once you cross the line of scrimmage, you're a ball carrier and the onus is on you to protect yourself. Go head first, take the tackle, get the hell out of bounds.
Everybody's got the
but
same,
a hit is coming,
same
right?
protections.
When you make the decision to cross the line
of
scrimmage, slide in the backfield anywhere you want. But once you cross the line of scrimmage, you're a ball carrier and you are going to get hit unless you get out of bounds.
Is the head first dive actually safer anyway?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically, Fitzpatrick didn't make that argument to me in those words, but I think that's the implication of what he's saying is if you slide, you run the risk of pounding your head backwards into the turf. If you actually go head first, you have a better chance of just absorbing a hit somewhere in the midsection and going to ground.
Yeah, I would like to get maybe a couple former NFL players on there because I mean, you're a former player, but people might look down.
I had to educate Richard Sherman on my glorious IAFL career.
I don't think
he thought I had never played the game.
Was he second team all IAFL?
I find it very unlikely.
I don't think so at all.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.